OMU commission changes.
Oh, they're all with the group. I told her, I said, sure. I just looked at the clock, it's 11:30. I've been lucky.
Welcome, everyone. We'll start as is our practice with a prayer and a pledge. So let's pray. We'll come to you this day and we thank you for this community that we have. We ask that you would continue to bless our community, bless our leaders as they do the business of this community, bless our national and local leaders, state and local leaders as well. Give them wisdom, guidance, and judgment. We ask that you would bless this commission and leadership team with wisdom and guidance to do the business of our utility that's in the best interest of our customers and our community. We ask that you would be with our employees always as they go out every day and work on behalf of the community, watch over them and bring them home from their jobs safely. We ask that you would bless this food for our nourishment and bless us as we do your work. We ask these things in your name. Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we have no employee
No, I asked this in the paper. I took a vote over it, sorry.
No. Okay, we'll go right to our discussion agenda. It's that time of year for our reserve policy update. We are not requesting any changes or suggesting any changes to our reserve policy. And Jason Potts will go through the balances and answer any questions you have. This is the last reserve policy that will include our participation in wholesale market. So next year we will be modifying the policy to reflect the new reality of not generating and selling into that market. But for this year, no recommendations for any changes to the policy. And with that, Jason, take it away.
Okay. Well, I'll be pretty brief on this. You all got 6 pages of details that hopefully you look at a little bit, but I'll hit the high point. This, just as a reminder, this policy is required under your governance policies, and we're required to do an update every year. That's why I'm here. This policy defines our overall cash levels that are reasonable and necessary to provide, to do several things. To provide adequate liquidity for our operations, to protect against emergencies, weather, whatever that might be, to provide specific reserve levels for our bond covenants, and this policy helps us stay in compliance with all of that. The good news is that it's all good news, and this PDF that you have shows that. Page 1 shows the electric system balances. The bottom line on this page, the key takeaway on this page is that we're in compliance with our days cash metric. And so scroll up just a little bit. Yep. So as you see at the very bottom, we have a minimum in our bond covenants of 150 days. Our 2019 fiscal year ended up at almost 300. Our budget for 2020 is right at 300, so we're well above both the minimum as well as our target. Our target is what we would like to do. Our minimum is what we have to do. Okay. Next page, please.
Jason, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Why do we have so much additional money in there that more than we need? That 91 million, and you're saying that's about 2 times what we need?
It is, and when we do our projections, we're balancing several metrics. This is just one of them, and so we're on electric, especially. We're really strong on cash. We're really tight on debt service coverage ratio, and so we have to keep our annual each year standing on its own 2 feet basis. Our annual operating revenues up to cover that year's debt service. And so We do have a really strong cash position. One thing we're doing, as you all know, is leveraging that to help with our debt service coverage. So by doing our bond defeasance, by doing that plan, part of which we did last fiscal year, part of which we're doing this current fiscal year, we're using some of these reserves to help that.
Why wouldn't we use more of those to pay down that bond funds?
Well, and that's one thing we're looking at, is what is the right level. We used a fairly conservative estimate based on the interest rates as they were when we did the projections. The interest rates and the projection of them has actually gone down since we did it. So when we come to y'all with the plan this fiscal year, it actually might be more, and it might do exactly what you're saying, which is use more of these reserves, which, as you said, are certainly adequate, more than adequate, to help with that. And all that translates into hopefully lower rates.
Yeah, because what are we earning on the balances that we have versus what we're paying out?
We earn somewhere around 2.5%.
2.5%?
Yep, and thankfully, the bonds that we'll have remaining after we defease and refund them are actually somewhere in the 3 to 4%. So there's not a huge delta between what we're paying and what we're earning.
Yeah.
But yeah, if there were, it would give us even more incentive to use more reserves to defease more.
Thanks.
Okay. Page 2 is actually the same thing, except for the water system. And it's kind of the same story, just not quite as big. So on the water system, we have a minimum of 125 days, same target of 200. We're our fiscal 19 ended at 188. Our fiscal 20 is a little bit lower at 163, but well over our minimum, and almost to our target at the end of 19. Switching gears a little bit, if you go to page 3 through 5 of your handout, this shows the 3 categories of funds that we're required to maintain. Our bond ordinance restricted funds, our capital improvement construction funds, and our operation reserve and contingency fund. And again, where we have a surplus in all three of those categories for both the electric and the water. And so this page, page 3, shows the electric funds in each of those 3 categories. A lot of numbers, and I can get into any of them that you have questions about, but the ones I want to ask you to focus on are far right. If the numbers on the far right are a positive, that means we have a surplus in that category. If they're a negative, that means we have a deficit or a shortage. We have a surplus in all of those categories. And that surplus is looking at the minimal balance at the end of 2019 versus the actual balance at the end of 2019. So again, we have, especially on the electric system, we have a good surplus over our minimums. The next page, this just gives you a little bit more breakdown of how the minimum for the operational reserves are calculated, but it's just supported for the previous page. So if you go to the next page. This is the same type of calculations on the water system. And so again, all the numbers on the right are positive, and so we do have surplus in all the categories on water. Okay. And then if you want even more details, this gives you that. This gives you some of the details of the funds that go into each of those categories, and some of the things that make up the minimums. So, like I said, I intended to be brief, and hopefully I was. As Kevin mentioned, when we get completely out of the wholesale market, we'll be coming back to you with changes to this policy, because we'll no longer need some of these funds, and the funds are specifically listed in the policy. We'll be eliminating them and coming up with a plan for that. And then probably not next year, but within a year or 2 after that, we'll be revising the policy for some ESS related things as well.
When do you think we'll have a determination of what we're going to do with that extra $50 million?
The additional reserves?
Yes.
Well, we're planning on doing the defeasance and refunding by closing in about November.
Yeah, but isn't that like $10 million?
we'll have a plan for whatever. the
Oh,
total
you're
amount is.
saying we might make that larger than what we started out with?
Yeah, it'll be a one-time, this is a cumbersome enough process, and expensive enough process, we're gonna try to do it in one shot.
Good.
Other questions or comments? Be happy to answer anything.
Thank you very much.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Jason. Next is on the discussion agenda is authorizing the general manager to execute this agreement with Ball. Just a little bit of background. In 2015, we entered into an agreement with Headwaters Resources, who are now Ball, to market coal combustion residuals from Elmer Smith Station. They had exclusive rights to some of those materials outside of our gypsum that we were marketing to USG, and we were obligated to provide those materials. There are lots of requirements for them and us to try to get the best bang for our buck we could in those markets. As we've gotten further away from that, as things have changed at the plant, some of our materials have not been as marketable, and now as we're looking, as we are phasing out Operation Elmer Smith, this agreement basically was a partial termination. We're at a high level terminating any obligations that each party has to the other for marketing or providing, but we are maintaining the option that if there are markets that come available that Boyle is aware of, that we will work together to try to market some of those materials, but there's no obligation on either party to do that. And they have some equipment on site that is being underutilized, and they will remove that from site as part of this agreement. So I recommend that we execute that agreement, and you guys give me the authority to do so.
Make a motion, we authorize.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Make a motion, we approve the consent. Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, general manager's report, which I have a copy of somewhere. All this stuff. As you guys, I'm sure, have seen, June was a cool, wet month, about 2 degrees below normal for the average temperature for June. Precipitation was way above normal at 4 inches, 3 inches is about normal precipitation. We got 7 inches thereabouts in Owensboro. So it was combinations of mild temperatures and the wet weather did result in lower sales, both wholesale and retail. City low was about 7.5%, 7.6% below budget. Wholesale sales were almost 34% below budget. That was a combination of weather and item number 2, Elmer Smith performance. And city load for June, Tim went back in his records, did a quick look, went back as far as 10 years. It's the lowest June city load we've had in at least 10 years. So it just reflects the nature of the weather, and as we've said many times, weather drives a lot of our business. On the plants, Unit 1, as I think I reported last time, came off for the last time on June the 8th. It is in standby, so if we have a catastrophic failure of Unit 2 and economics justify, we could put it back on. We're maintaining it in that mode for the remainder of the summer months. We talked about that if prices supported it, we would continue to operate Unit 1 to get some market revenues, even though we didn't have any maintenance budget for Unit 1 for June. But prices did not support it. It ran through June 8th because Unit 2 was off and Unit 2 came back on. Market prices didn't support keeping Unit 1 on. And then as you see, Unit 2 had a rough month, had a lot of outage days. We think we've got all those things resolved, and it's run well since the end of the month. But it came back off for about 8 days, and the economics didn't justify putting Unit 1 back on for city load. We were able to purchase on our backup power agreement and more economically than we could have put Unit 1 back online. But Unit 2 is running well since, and the weather in July is a bit better, so we're hoping to have more normal and be on budget for July. On the water side, cool and wet depresses water sales as well, so they were, volume sales were about 10% below budget, but expenses were a little bit better than that, below budget, so we did have a net income that came in just above budget for June on the water side. And even with those challenging weather conditions in June and some early July downpours, cabin construction is going well. We have had probably a little bit of schedule impact due to the wet weather, and just, you know, when those pits fill up with water, you lose that time, the time it takes to pump them back out and get them back to where they can work in them. But it's not as bad as I think it could have been, considering how bad the weather's been for construction. They're looking at maybe a 2-week impact, which on the overall schedule, we're still going to be good shape on the cabin construction schedule. On the pipeline construction, that's going very well. That's on schedule. It's going to be done well in advance of when we need it. That's moving right along very well. We're going to start giving you a quarterly detailed update on the cabin and the pipeline construction. We'll start that at the August work session, where Russ will be in and dive a little deeper and show you some of the progress that's made and go into schedule and all those kinds of things. So everything is going well over there.
On the decreased load last month, 10%, you said for the last 10 years, did you break that down any further? Was it any difference in retail, commercial?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just overall.
Just pretty much generally overall weather related.
Yeah, we haven't dug into the details.
I would say there was more effect on the residential just because they're more temperature dependent.
Yeah.
Commercial and industrial.
Air conditioning load is way down. Okay, any other questions on GM report? Next, we have our year-end financial update. Laura has a 2.5-hour presentation. But as Jason kind of alluded to, I think we mentioned last month, fiscal 19 was a good year for us, and Laura's going to go through and explain why.
And I hate to contradict Kevin, but I do not plan to be before you in 2.5 hours. I'll go through it pretty quickly. If you all have any questions, as usual, just stop me at any point.
But this doesn't reflect the 4Q.
No, it does not. This is as of May 31st, 2000.
We'll get there in a minute. Bridget gets to bring you the bad news this month.
I get to bring you good news. Sorry, Bridget. Just as a reminder of what our consolidated electric system is made of the 4 units there. I'll start with our operating revenue, and as usual, we give you a bit of a trend on actuals for 4 years, and it does include this year's actuals as well as the budget for, 2019. Our revenue was below budget by 2.6%. And that primarily is driven by our retail business. Take off my glasses. Our operating expenses are down 6.2% below budget, but above last year's. It is driven primarily due to our power production costs, as you can see there. Our net income was above budget, $17.1 million compared to our $12.1 million budget. And then our dividends, that is here shown here, pretty much it is below budget. Our cash portion is pretty much on target with budget, but our pilot or free services was slightly below budget. The next slide shows our cash and investment balances. Jason went through it in more detail, but it shows that our operating and contingency funds were above budget, as well as our capital improvement funds, while our bond restricted funds were pretty much on target with budget. Our capital expenditures were below budget, nearly 84%, and that's primarily just driven by lower expenses at production side in particular. This next slide shows our working capital ratio, basically the number of times our current assets exceeds our liabilities. We're pretty much on target with last year as well. This is unadjusted. We do have some audit adjustments that could affect that once the audit is complete. The next slide shows our long-term debt to equity ratio, pretty much on target for last year as well. Our debt service coverage, pretty steady, 1.8, nearly 1.8 there. That is all for the total consolidated electric. I'll go through the various units now. Our generation at Elmer Smith was at 2.2 million megawatt hours, which is about 4% above budget. Our operating expenses were below budget by 6%, primary drivers being our fuel costs. We did have some coal adjustments of about $5.6 million that drove that cost down. This next slide we'd like to show you as a better indicator of performance. It is our operating expense at Elmer Smith per megawatt hour. The blue line, that first line, represents our non-fuel expense. That includes a lot of our fixed costs, including maintenance. It is below budget, and that's primarily related to those fixed costs being spread over more megawatt hours. The second line, the red line, represents our fuel costs. It is below budget, and as I mentioned, is primarily associated with the $5.6 million coal adjustment that we made in 19. The total line, the top line, it is below budget as well as a product of all those other things.
Laura, I do think that occasionally we need to put that in perspective though, because if people that don't follow our budget and we're looking and you're 10% above on wholesale and your expenses are down, it's not to be misleading, but you know, when you talk about shutting the power plant down, Elmer Smith is not a profit generator. We budget for a loss. Really what all it means is we're not losing as much money. Sometimes we put it in perspective, people don't really see that. They're just seeing it.
The way I like to phrase it, and I had an employee meeting this morning, is our retail customers are not having to pay as much of the cost as they would have. So every dollar that we can get, even if it's not covering all of our costs from the wholesale market, is a dollar the retail customer doesn't have to pay. So, but you're correct. It is.
I mean,
we budget
it is
for-
encouraging. It's good news that we're beating the budget projections, but just keep in mind we budget for loss.
Yes. Correct.
Yeah, sorry.
But while we're on that, but before we move away, I do want to, a lot of this is due to coal pile adjustments that we made in getting the inventories corrected. But it also, I want to compliment the folks at Elmer Smith. They have done a great job under very trying circumstances when they know that there's an axe hanging over their head, that they know that their jobs have a time limit on them, and they're doing a great job. And I think we need to just keep that in mind, what a good job they're doing with all the uncertainty they have in their work life and their personal life. So I appreciate what they're doing.
No other questions? We'll move on. The next slide is our revenue per megawatt hour, and that pretty much highlights Tony's question as well. It shows that our market prices for the wholesale revenue is above budget, but what's more important is our dispatch level. It's above our dispatch level, and as Kevin noted, anything above that dispatch level represents benefits to our customers. Our sales were above budget, and that's a product of more available generation, and it was up 9.7%. Our revenues were up 10.2% above budget, and our expenses were below budget by 3.9%. That is primarily driven by our wholesale, our purchase power. The next slide shows a breakdown of our purchase power expense and shows that the primary driver there is the fuel cost. But again, as Tony noted, we do budget a loss there, so this represents a lower loss, basically. Retail electric system, we're up 2.2% above budget for fiscal year 19 on sales, electric sales. Our revenue was down 9%. That is a product of tying back into Tony's question. That is a product of better wholesale performance, and therefore we collected less through our retail customers. And it's down 9%. This slide shows our energy cost adjustment balance. We budgeted to come in right at our policy limit of 20 million, but it shows that we were down quite a bit at 13.8 million, as opposed to the $20 million balance budget.
And also remember, we budgeted to get that 20 million by using 3 million of reserves that we did not have to use. So that's good news as well.
Our operating expenses were down 8.1% for the retail electric system. Again, it's driven by our purchase power expense. And then the next slide shows the breakdown of that. A lot of that is in our fuel costs as well as some transmission. That's it for retail. I'll move on to telecommunications unless there are any questions. Our telecommunications unit, our revenue was up 7% above budget, primarily driven by our residential and commercial customers. The next slide shows a breakdown of our commercial revenue components. That's primarily driven by our internet sales. It's up 3.4% above budget. Our expenses are below budget by 8.7%, and that's primarily driven by our O&M costs. Again, just our efforts of trying to maintain costs, but despite growth in that area. And that's it for the electric system, and I'll move on to the water system unless there are any questions. Our cubic feet sales for the water system were 2.4% above budget, and pretty much across the board there. Our revenue for the water system was 5.6% below budget, and that primarily is a product of us. The rate increase was budgeted to go into effect much earlier than it actually went into effect. Our operating expenses are down 5%. Again, as Kevin noticed, product of our efforts to maintain costs or contain costs there. It's primarily driven by production. This slide, similar to the electric side, we show our expense per unit, and this is expense per 1,000 gallons. Again, just showing that in total we are below budget on our expenses there. Our net income for the water system was at $1.1 million, which is above our $500,000 budget for this year. Our cash and investment balances are showing that our capital improvement balances are higher. We just got a delayed start on our capital project there, major capital project there, while our bond restricted and operating funds were pretty much on target. This shows our capital expenditures only being about 33%, and that is because of the major project delay. Our payment in lieu of taxes for the water system pretty much on target with what we budgeted. And then a working capital ratio, current assets exceeding our current liabilities, 1.4, but again, this can be adjusted with our audit adjustments as well. Our long-term debt increased a little, and that's associated with the debt issuance. And then our debt service coverage is still at 2.2, pretty close to our trend. That's it for both systems. I do put a couple of slides together that shows our G&A, general and administrative expenses in total for both electric and water, to give you kind of idea of what that looks like. It's kind of hard to see it when it's spread out amongst the various units. It is 15% below budget. And that shows a breakdown of how we allocated among the units. The next slide shows details of that. Again, 15% below budget. Primary drivers being outside services, primarily at wholesale, as well as computer costs and our health and related expenses. There are no other questions. In summary, our total consolidated electric system net income was $5.1 million above budget. That is despite our retail revenue that was $9.6 million below budget. But but it's driven by our wholesale market prices that were above budget, and combine that with the increased available generation that resulted in $8.4 million higher than budget revenue, net income, excuse me. Our fuel costs at Elmer Smith were below budget, and that contributed as well. And then our telecommunications unit was $207,000 above budget, and our water system was $588,000 above budget. Are there any questions? That's all I have.
Thank you, Mark. As you said, we had a good year and improved to catch up in June of this year. Another good year. I should have mentioned Lynn is at a insurance conference this week, so Jason and Bridget Wayne, if everybody's ever met Bridget or Marion County, are ably filling in for her. So next will be the financial report for the month of June, which is not so rosy, but not as bad as it could have been.
Okay, that's what I was gonna say, even though he said I was gonna deliver bad news. It's not all bad, because our expenditures were overall less than budget, by 1.6 million. So we ended up with a consolidated net income that was 129% better than budget for the year to date. Retail performance without the ECA adjustment was up 99.4% above budget. And then our wholesale, that's where the bad news was, which he already said, and he already had kind of talked about too. For year to date, we are 89.1% below budget on wholesale. Telecommunications did $22,000 better than fiscal year to date budget. And water, as Kevin mentioned, is $65,000 better than budget for year to date. And going down to the bottom, for projected, it's only 1 month, but right now, looking at our performance, we would project that our overall consolidated electric would be 13.3% better than budget. Retail without the ECA would be 13% better than budget. Wholesale would be 7.7% below budget, which would not be good. Telecommunications are projected to be $23,000 better than budget, and water is projected to be $65,000 better than budget.
So if we get back to budget for the remaining 11 months, then that's where we'll be. Hopefully, we will. As I said, it's not as bad as it could have been because expenses were down, but I don't think we want to have retail sales at 10-year lows moving forward. So, any questions for Patrick? Thank you, Bridget. Good job. So that's the reports. We'll move on to governance items. I think JT had a good time going through his items. I believe we're in compliance with all the requirements of all four of those items, so nothing to report there. Any actions needed? Okay, there's no general information or other business. Upcoming meetings. We will have the August 1st work session. Our 2 agenda items for that will be the cabin plant quarterly update, and then we're going to bring to you for a discussion our proposed scope for our compensation study and analysis that we are going to be doing this year. We talked about that a little bit, and so we'll kind of lay that out for what we propose to do and get your all's input before we finalize the scope and go out for bid. So those will be the primary items for that meeting. And then our regular meeting will be the 15th. And we didn't have anything else until closed session. Mr. Chairman.
Anything else?
Okay.
Go to closed session.
A motion to go into closed session to discuss personnel matters pursuant to KRS 61-810-1F, pending litigation pursuant to KRS 61.810.1C in matters which are required to be discussed in privacy pursuant to KRS 61.810.1K, including but not limited to KRS 61.878.1CI and KRS 61.872.6.
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Excuse me.